The Mystery of the Missing Masterpiece by Zoe Davies and Alia Drake. A Chatty Zebra Curriculum original. Prologue. I am going to commit an unsolvable crime. Don't believe me? Just watch and see. I have planned it out meticulously. Every detail has been considered and made foolproof. No one will ever catch me. And then I will be rich. Richer than you could ever imagine. Richer than the richest person you know. Richer than the King of England himself. And whilst the world is running around wringing their hands at my cunning plot, at my superior intelligence, and my dastardly daring, I shall be lying on a beach and laughing at their stupidity. For you see, I am going to steal the fighting Temeray, and there's nothing you or anyone else can do about it. Warrington News. Art theft. Famous Turner painting stolen. The famous painting The Fighting Temeray by William Turner was stolen last night whilst in residence at Warrington Gallery. This heinous crime was discovered in the early hours of the morning by the museum janitor Fred Fowler as he was doing his morning rounds. He immediately alerted the police and investigations are underway. The Fighting Temeray was on loan to Warrington Gallery from its usual residence at the National Gallery in London, and the opening of the exhibition has been long awaited by the town's residents. Known as the nation's favourite painting, this loss will be felt across the country. Layla Lysmith, a local townsperson, commented, "I've had my tickets for the opening this Saturday for the last 6 months. I can't believe I came so close to seeing this beautiful artwork, and now it's gone." Unfortunately, it seems the only place you will be able to view the artwork is the back of £20 notes, on which it has been depicted since 2020. If anyone has any information on the whereabouts of the Fighting Temeray, or witnessed anything during the night or the early hours of the 7th or 8th of January to do with this crime, please contact your local police station. Chapter 1. Forensic Science. Mia read the newspaper article over her dad's shoulder. "Well, that's our Saturday plans ruined," he sighed, and sat the paper down on the kitchen table. They had tickets for the opening day of the exhibition, and Mia's father was interested in anything related to the Battle of Trafalgar, and had been especially looking forward to it. "How can something like this happen? I thought they had all those modern alarms and security devices now," questioned Mia's mother, stirring the porridge at the hob. Mia felt a bubble of excitement swell in her stomach. Of course, it was awful that someone had stolen the painting, and she had been looking forward to the day out as well, although not as much as her father, if truth be told. But her best friend, Max's father, was a crime scene investigator. Could he be working on this crime scene? And if he was, would he let Mia help? Mia had wanted to be a forensic scientist herself ever since meeting Max and learning all about the crimes his father had helped solve. Crime scene investigators were one of the first people to attend a crime scene. They got to closely examine the area and collect anything that might be possible evidence, as well as photographing the scene. Mia, who had always enjoyed puzzles, loved the idea of discovering clues to crimes which others may overlook. She relished every time she was at Max's house and got to hear his father's stories and clever detective skills, which helped with the investigation. Only last month, He had solved a 20-year-old murder mystery cold case after some new evidence was discovered in the wall of a house. Unfortunately, Mia's mother didn't share her love for the gruesome science and had banned Mia from talking about the remains. They sat down for breakfast and Mia's mum brought over the bowl of steaming porridge. Her dad looked at them glumly before releasing another large sigh. Just then, the phone rang, making Mia's mum jump. Mia ran over and discovered, to her delight, it was Max. "Guess what, Mia?" "Your dad's on the missing Turner case?" "My dad's on the missing Turner case, but guess what else?" "What?" "You're never going to believe it." "What? Just tell me." "He's agreed to let us both assist him today at the scene." "What?" "He knows how much you want to be a forensic scientist and agreed, and there's nothing better than hands-on experience. So he said if we promise to follow all the rules and listen to him at all times, then we can help out." Mia for once was speechless. She didn't know what to say. This went beyond her wildest dreams. Of course she'd been hoping that Max's dad would get the case, imagining he'd be able to fill her in on all the details. But she never imagined she might actually be working on the case. "Mia, are you still there?" "Oh, yes, I am." "Did you want to come today? I thought you'd be more excited." "No, I do! I really do! I just never expected this." "We'll be around in half an hour. Make sure you're ready, as Dad wants to get started as soon as possible." Mia rushed into the kitchen to tell her parents her news. They both seemed surprised that children would be allowed to attend a crime scene, but knowing how important it was to Mia, they both quickly agreed. She began loading her backpack, and she knew that Max's dad had all the science equipment needed, but she grabbed a notebook and pen so she could record any observations they made. She also packed a lunch as she wasn't sure how long they'd be at the scene for. Before she knew it, a car horn was beeping outside and she was racing to get her shoes on. Outside, she climbed into Max's dad's van and saw his bags full of equipment piled up in the boot behind. "Right, Mia, I'm looking forward to showing you the ropes, but I do have some very strict rules that you must follow. First, do not touch anything or move anything without asking first. Secondly, you must follow my instructions on how to do the procedures exactly. Okay?" "Yes, definitely. I understand how important this is." "Great. Okay, you guys want to familiarise yourself with the equipment before we get there?" Max dragged a bag into the front and opened it up. Inside was a range of digital and science equipment, including a camera, tripod, evidence bags, sample pots, brushes and containers of powders and liquids. The van pulled up at the car park of the museum, and Mia felt the bubbles of excitement rise again. She was about to enter her very first crime scene. A real-life crime scene. Chapter 2. Securing the Scene. As they climbed the steps up to the front doors of the gallery's entrance, the door swung open abruptly, and a rather fierce-looking woman stood before them. "Sarah Shenanigans!" She reached out her hand to shake Max's dad's hand. "I'm the museum director. You must be the crime scene investigator." She did a double take when she saw Max and Mia. "Hi, yes, I'm Daryl Robbins. I'll be starting the investigations today." "Why are there children with you, Mr. Robbins?" "Oh, these are my assistants today, Mia and Max." "You do realise this is a crime scene?" Max's dad frowned and shifted the bags on his shoulders. "Yes, of course. I promise they'll be responsible and well behaved. They're both interested in forensics and thought this would be the perfect opportunity for work experience." Mrs. Shenanigans looked both children up and down and scowled. "I'm not happy about this. Not happy at all. I will be ringing your supervisor right away." With all respect, Sarah. Mrs. Shenanigans, if you please. With due respect, Mrs. Shenanigans, I am the lead investigator on this crime scene, which you shouldn't even have been in. So if you don't mind, we will be getting to work. Mrs. Shenanigans turned on her heels and tried to storm off to the office, but stumbled over a cat that had come up silently behind her. Oh, it's going to be one of those days, she huffed and stormed away, muttering under her breath. Nothing like a warm welcome, Max's dad joked, whilst looking around for where they were supposed to go. Luckily, they were spotted by a waiting policeman who showed them where to get changed into their clean forensic suits, shoe coverings and gloves before pointing out the way to the gallery where the painting had been hung. The suits were papery and uncomfortable and had hoods that fit snug around their heads. The gloves made their hands feel sweaty, and the shoe covers made their feet feel as though they were slipping a little, like going ice skating for the first time. Why do we have to wear all this? Asked Max, as they rustled down the hallway towards the gallery. Well, have a think about what you're covering, smiled his father, and then see if you can work out why it needs to be covered. I think I can guess, said Mia thoughtfully. We don't want to mix up any evidence we might find with anything we might drop from our own clothes or bodies. Very good, Mia. We don't want to contaminate the scene, but there is another reason too. We need to protect ourselves in case there is any evidence that might be harmful, explained Mr. Robbins. Max and Mia looked confused. What could be harmful in paintings going missing? Asked Max. His father looked serious this time. If the thief had used chemicals or left something breakable, for example, you could get hurt. This is why I said you have to do what I tell you. Listen and do not touch anything unless I give permission. They promised again to be very careful and responsible. By this time they'd reached the room where the painting had briefly been displayed. Were there any obvious signs of false entry? Mr. Robbins asked the policeman. None that we've found at the moment. We're also about to start collecting statements from the museum employees, so I'll catch you later. The policeman waved and went off to do his job. The door to the entrance was blocked by yellow police tape. As they ducked under the tape, Mia caught sight of a shadow in the corner of the corridor. She looked up and saw an older man watching them. The cat had been there earlier in his arms. As soon as he saw she had been seen, he ducked back under the corner. There was a man just there, Mia pointed at the corner, and he was holding the cat. Oh, that'd be the janitor, Fred Fowler, the policeman answered. He's the one to discover the theft. Mia didn't know why, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was suspicious. It was the way he'd been watching them and then hidden. That's not normal behaviour, right? Max's dad put down the bags and surveyed the room. So the painting was hanging there, the policeman pointed to the blank space on the gallery's walls. Max's dad pulled out his camera and started taking photographs of the scene exactly as it looked. He explained what he was doing as he went along so that Max and Mia didn't get too bored or fidgety. He told them it was important to document exactly how the scene was found, because then they could use any clues to piece together a sequence of events, a little like a paint by numbers. If things were moved around, it could give a false idea of what had happened and lead to the wrong picture emerging. It seemed to take a long time. There were lots of close-up shots, ones that panned wide, and then for every speck of dirt had to be labelled with a numbered marker and ruler, and photographed too. At long last he was done taking pictures from what seemed to Mia every possible angle. Chapter 3. Fingerprints. The next thing we need to do is dust for fingerprints. Max's dad opened one of the bags he had brought in from the car and turned to face the children. Do you know why fingerprints are important? Mia wanted to prove how much he already knew, and that he hadn't made a mistake by bringing them along. They can be used to identify the criminal, as everyone has unique fingerprints. That's right, Mia. And do you know how they are left? By people touching them? Well, yes, but the reason is that you leave fingerprints behind because you have two types of special glands in your fingers. One that releases sweat and the other releases oils. This residue is left behind when you touch things. He then knelt back down next to the bag and began pulling out pots of powder and brushes. The first thing we're going to do is gently brush this powder over the surfaces where the criminal may have touched, particularly the walls surrounding where the painting was hung and the door frames. You must be very careful to brush delicately so as not to destroy any of the prints. He began lightly brushing over the wall, starting around the nail where the painting was hung and further out. Mia was surprised when nothing appeared. Nothing? Mia questioned. Nothing, he replied. They then started brushing around the door frame they had entered. One single print appeared. How can there only be one print in a busy place like this? Max questioned. It would seem someone cleaned very recently, his dad replied. Some criminals wear gloves, and others try to clean things down to cover their tracks. There's always some evidence that will be left behind. We just have to look carefully. First, they photographed the print. Then gently they laid some tape over it, which lifted the print. This was then sealed over a card, which Max's dad put in an evidence bag. Okay, make sure it's closed with the sticky strip and make a note on the time and location on the bag, please. They moved over to the door on the opposite wall, and again nothing more appeared. Lastly, they checked the rest of the room. But there wasn't a single print anywhere else to be found. Well, at least we have one of their prints, exclaimed Max. It might not be the thief. They might have worn gloves, and that's why there aren't any other prints, explained his dad. But it must have been left recently. It's the only one. The police will need to put together a timeline, including the area was last cleaned, before we can draw any conclusions about it. And we will also have to fingerprint all the staff to eliminate any prints that they might have left around here. Mia couldn't help feeling disappointed. She thought they'd have found more fingerprints to examine, but then she remembered what they would be doing next, using the forensic light to examine the area. What hidden clues might they discover? Chapter 4. Forensic Light. Mr. Robbins asked Max to go get the special torches and bring them over to the corner where he is waiting. Max retrieved the large UV torch and the LED torch from the bag and clicked them on and off to check that they worked. Mia got excited. I absolutely love the black light torches. They're so cool. My parents got me one for Christmas to use on neon paint art. Max, you know how they work, right? Yes, groaned Max. I remember how you went on and on about it when we learned about them in that science workshop we went to. It beams out light outside the visible spectrum at the ultraviolet end of the scale. Well, I'm glad you absorbed some knowledge in that workshop, said his dad with a chuckle. I'm never sure if you're learning when you are so distracted all the time. They began walking back and forth along the floor of the gallery to see if anything was revealed, first using the LED torch and then flashing the UV beam. Once again, like with the fingerprints, the area appeared to be completely clear. But then, in the bottom of the wall, underneath where the painting used to hang, they spotted a splatter of dry fluid. Quick, bring over the swabs and buffer as well as the evidence bags. Max's dad carefully wet the swabs with the buffer solution and then used the swabs to gather up a sample of the liquid and place it in the collection container, before placing that in the evidence bag, which he quickly sealed. He passed the bag to Max to be labelled. Then Mia caught sight of a long, dark hair caught in the edge of the door frame. Max's dad showed her how to gently remove it with a pair of tweezers and put that in a fresh evidence bag, which was labelled and added to the evidence pile. Then they moved the light slowly over the walls. Mia thought it was going to be completely clean again, but suddenly a glowing area lit up high above the wall, just underneath a long, thin window near the ceiling. "Bingo!" exclaimed Max's dad. "What might all these fluid samples be?" asked Mia, wondering how anyone managed to reach that high up on the wall. "It could either be trace remains of blood or saliva, but I'm betting it's blood. We're going to need a ladder." Max ran off to find the janitor and see if he had a ladder. As they waited for him to return, Mia questioned how anyone managed to get blood that high up on the wall. They began taking distance photographs with Mia holding the torch. "It's better not to make assumptions this early in an investigation. We don't want it to cloud our judgment. But it could be that the thief came in through that window above and somehow cut themselves, which is what we're seeing on the wall." Mia looked up at the window. It must be 15 feet above where they were standing. How could anyone have managed to reach the window or get down from it? Max finally returned with the janitor, Fred Fowler, dragging an old rickety-looking ladder. Fred was scowling and muttering under his breath, and Max looked decidedly uncomfortable. They set the ladder up against the wall, and Max's dad climbed up with the camera around his neck. "Right, Mia, shine the light on the spot. Keep it steady. Max, pass me the ruler." He began by holding the ruler against the splatter and photographing it. He then asked Max to pass him the cotton swabs, buffer and sample pot. Carefully he wiped the dampened swab over the splatter and put the swab in the pot. The pot he then placed in the evidence bag and carefully threw it to Max. "Right, that window is now an area of interest. I'm going to go up closer and check it from the inside. Then we need to go outside and check the surrounding area." Mia held her breath. As he climbed even higher on the ladder, she could see him taking some more photographs and then reaching carefully into his pocket for the fingerprint powder and brush to sweep the area. "There's nothing more to see on this side of the window, but I have a feeling they will be on the other side. The window is now shut again, so if they did come through that window, I think they probably went back out through it again too." Carefully they packed up the equipment, folding up the ladder and carried it between them back to the entrance and then round to the side of the museum. It was near the back of the museum where they found the window of interest. Next to it were some large rubbish bins. They began shining an LED light over the outside wall and the bins. There was a tuft of hair near the wheel of the bins, which they all agreed was probably animal fur, but they bagged it as evidence just in case. The light helped show a series of soil marks up the wall, but before they could begin photographing and collecting samples of the soil, Max called out excitedly, "Hey! I think I found something!" Chapter 5. Impression Analysis. There, in the mud, next to the large rubbish bin, was a perfect footprint. Because the weather had been so cold, the mud was hard and the print clearly marked out. "This is great, Max! Well done for spotting this!" They used the ruler to measure out the footprint and took several photographs. "How do footprints help?" questioned Mia. "They don't contain DNA, so how can they be useful?" "Well, we can learn a lot from shoe prints. We can see the size of the shoe and most likely the shape of the foot. This can give us clues as to the size and weight of the person who left it, whether they're a child or adult even. We can also learn what sort of shoe, whether it was a trainer or a high heel, for example. Sometimes we can even see the specific brand of the shoe left by the pattern, which we can compare with a suspect's shoes." Mia could see from the positioning of the print that the person who'd left the impression might have climbed onto the side of the bin, which would have brought them closer to the window. Max's dad began mixing up some powder with water and explained that he was mixing up a paste called plaster of Paris, and he poured it into the impression of the footprint and waited for it to set. "We're lucky it's been so cold and dry. If the ground was wet, it would be a lot harder to get a cast of the print." It was going to take 30 minutes for it to set properly, so they began to examine the wall. They took samples of the soil marks left on the wall. Mia was beginning to put together a picture of what might have happened. Somehow, someone may have walked up the wall to get to the window, having first climbed onto the bin. Mia then climbed to the top of the ladder and reached the window. She first photographed the window, then she took a closer look. Using the LED torch, it highlighted some marks on the frame of the window. There was also a scrap of fabric caught in the frame. Mia called down to alert Max's dad, who swapped places with her. He measured the marks and then took impressions of them using a special silicone putty. He used the tweezers to pull out the fabric and bagged it. The fabric was black. From these marks, it looks like someone damaged the frame of the window with some sort of tool. They then caught a part of their body on the nail here in the frame, tearing down to the skin and leaving behind the fabric and probably causing the blood splatter below. The cold was biting now, and a breeze blew through the alley where they stood. Mia checked her watch and couldn't believe that they'd been collecting evidence for several hours. Mia took a mental note of the evidence they'd collected so far: the fingerprint, fur sample, fluid samples, soil samples and footprint casts, and finally the tool mark impressions. Although it covered a range of different samples, Mia wondered if it would be enough to solve the case. It didn't really feel like they had much at all. Max's dad finished bagging and labelling everything up and putting away the equipment. They returned to the van and removed their protective suits, masks and gloves, disposing of them into yellow clinical waste bags. Right, guys, it's been a long day and I understand if you both have had enough now and want to go home. Because it's such an important case, I will need to get these samples to the lab and start analysing them as soon as possible. So do you want me to take you home first? Max and Mia looked at each other. Mia was tired, but there was no way she'd miss a chance to see the laboratory and the science that went on there. Max felt the same as he quickly replied, "We want to come with you to the lab, Dad. Is that okay?" "If you're sure. It might be a late night." "Yes, of course!" both kids chorused, eager to be part of the action. Chapter 6. The Lab. The van pulled up into the laboratory underground car park, and they waited for the security guards to raise the barrier. The temperature had dropped further, and even in her coat, Mia was feeling cold and looking forward to being inside the warm rooms. She wasn't sure what to expect, but imagined rooms of white tiled walls and sterile metal tables. Instead, it was a warm, cosy office suite with desks and high-tech computer equipment. "Let's first get a hot drink and a sandwich and then begin on the science." Max's dad moved over to the coffee machine, which, much to the kids' relief, also made hot chocolate. A vending machine provided a selection of sandwiches, which they gulped down, eager to get to the lab and start sorting through the evidence they collected. Sipping on her drink, Mia wondered what they would start analysing first. She couldn't wait to see the equipment and the procedures that they would use to unlock the secrets of their clues. Max's dad called their attention to a whiteboard mounted on the wall. At the top he'd written the case number assigned by the police and the date. He then began writing fingerprints, fluid identification, hair and fur comparison, soil analysis, footprint investigation, fabric identification, tool marks analysis. They began with the fingerprint. He scanned the mark they collected and scanned it into the computer. Next, he began running it through the fingerprint database to see if it came up with any matches. It didn't feel like long before an alert chimed from the computer. Max and Mia rushed over and gave a gasp. There, before them, was the mugshot of Fred Fowler, scowling at the camera. "Okay, this is interesting, and I'll send it to the police right away. It looks like he's previously been arrested." Max's dad printed off the match results. "I knew it! I knew it was him!" declared Max, excitedly jumping up and down. "He didn't want to help me get the ladder and complained the whole time that we should have brought our own." His dad gave him a warning glance. However, he does work there, and we know that he was the person to discover the painting was missing, so it's plausible he touched the frame but is innocent. Oh, Dad, come on! He looks guilty! Remember, you must remain objective and wait until you have all the evidence. Otherwise, it might stop you looking at other possibilities properly. Secretly, Mia was glad it wasn't over that quickly. She wanted to learn more about the other tests they could do and wasn't ready to finish acting as a crime scene investigator. Although she had also agreed that the janitor did seem guilty, he had had opportunity, that's for sure, and would know the building better than anybody else. Max's dad was setting up the microscope. He placed the hairs they collected on the slides and placed them under the microscope to examine. Right, Max and Mia, come and look at these two hairs and tell me the differences that you can see. They looked into the microscope, surprised that the two dark hairs that looked fairly similar to the naked eye could look so different under the microscope. The first that they'd found inside the museum looked smooth, whereas the second hair looked scaly and had a thick border on the edges. Why do they look so different? Max asked. Why do you think? Because they're from different people, Mia suggested. Actually, it's because they're from different species. The smooth one is human hair, whereas the scaly one with the thick edges is a mouse's hair. Ew! Mia couldn't help herself shuddering. She had a slight fear of small rodents. You have to get used to rodent remains, I'm afraid. They often come up in some form in the crime scenes. Mia shivered again, but made a mental note that she was going to have to be brave and get used to dealing with rodents. If today had taught her anything, it was how much she wanted to work in forensics. Max's dad took another look at the human hair under the microscope. Unfortunately, this hair doesn't have the hair root. That's the part that contains the DNA, so we won't be able to DNA test it. But we can still give us clues as to who left it behind. We can tell the length of the hair type and colour the owner had. We can also see if it contains hair dye. Mia frowned. Well, there's one thing we can be certain of. What's that, Mia? It definitely isn't Fred Fowler's. He doesn't have any hair at all. Great observation, Mia. So that's something that we can be fairly certain about. It's probable that the fingerprint and hair are from different people. Unless he has really long armpit hair, laughed Max cheekily. Mia and Max's dad roared with laughter. Right, let's get another drink and have a snack. Then we can begin investigations into the footprint and tool marks. Chapter 7. Indentation Analysis. Max's dad began by sticking a photograph of the footprint and cast on the board. Next to the prints were the rulers showing that the shoe was 30 centimetres long. So, Mia and Max, what can you tell me from the print? That the shoe was quite big. Yes, likely it was a male, size 12. I don't think the marks look like trainer patterns. I agree. Have a look through the shoe index and see if you can find any that match. To me, they look like work boots of some type. He passed the book over to Max, who began looking through and comparing carefully the tread patterns of the shoes to the print. So it was a man who left the print? Not necessarily, Mia. Also, there's something a bit strange about this print. Take a look and see what you think. Mia inspected it closely. Here, if you look at the cast, it might make it clearer. Mia held the cast up. It became very obvious with the cast that the heel and middle of the shoe was a lot heavier than the front part. The cast at the middle and the back of the shoe was considerably deeper than the toes. What do you think this suggests? Mia thought hard. That the shoe wasn't the right size for the person wearing it. Indeed, Mia. That was my fault as well. The weight difference suggests that the person who wore it had a foot that was considerably smaller than the shoe. But why would they wear shoes that were too big, especially if they climbed up a wall? This is what I was wondering as well. Max, have you had any luck matching the tread? I think it might be this one, Dad. Max held up the image. It was of Timberland Pro boots. Max's dad wrote the findings on the board, whilst Mia copied them into her notebook. She wanted to be able to examine all the evidence later at home. Next, Max's dad stuck the images of the tall indentations on the window frame on the board. It appeared someone had broken the frame and opened the window. This appears to be the entry point. We can compare these tool marks with these different tools in the tool index and see if we can identify what was used to open the window. They examined the scuff marks for any clear identifying characteristics. They looked too big to have been made by a screwdriver or a flathead screwdriver, Mia remarked. Surely it must have been a crowbar that made these marks. Yes, it certainly looks like it. Because they come in different sizes and brands, we have a number here that we can try out on a block of wood, similar to the mark, and see if any match up to the marks. This, thought Mia, was going to be fun. They spent an hour trying out different crowbars on the wood, labelling each one so that they didn't get mixed up. Finally, they narrowed down the size of the crowbar and added the information to the evidence board. Chapter 8. Fluid Splatter Analysis. They looked at the photographs of the two liquid splatter areas which was revealed in the UV light. What can we tell from the positions of the splatters? Max's dad looked up at both the children. There's more of the substance at the top near the window, like it's splayed out, and thinner and less amount at the bottom, at least for the second area. So what do you think this suggests, Mia? That the fluid was spilt near to the window and then ran down the wall, then someone tried to clean it up? That was exactly my thoughts. What about the first splatter we saw? Asked Max's dad. Max walked over to the board to have a closer look. It looks more glowy than the second one, he observed. Well deduced, son, said his dad proudly. The glowy look suggests it is cat urine because that actually glows under black light. Wow! Breathed Max and Mia in unison. I need to go shine my Christmas torch into the cat litter, laughed Mia. Well, moving on, we know that the fabric was caught on the nail on the window latch. I suspect the thief caught a body part on the nail and cut themselves, leaving the trail of blood on the wall. They then attempted to clean it up while they were inside the museum. Oh, and it shows just how hard it is to erase the blood evidence, said Mia admiringly. They examined the fabric under the microscope. It looked like jean material. However, when they examined the edges, they looked quite neatly cut with the edges frayed out. Next, they decided to test the fluid to see what type of fluid it was. Once they'd identified it, Max's dad was hoping they might be able to extract some DNA from it. We're going to perform a test called the Kastler-Mayer test. I am going to use some chemicals to create a reagent. For this, I need to mix equal amounts of phenolphthalein and hydrogen peroxide. Next, I'm going to use a dropper and drop it onto our sample here of the fluid. We need to make sure that it fully covers the sample. If the sample turns pink in colour, then it's positive reaction for blood. If not, then it's a negative reaction and suggests it's some other fluid. They watched as he mixed up the chemicals and then held their breath as they dropped the reagent onto the sample. Quickly, the sample turned pink. Well, we definitely have blood here, guys. This is brilliant, as we can now examine it for DNA and hopefully determine the blood group it is. He took another sample of the blood and placed it under the microscope. He pointed out the red blood cells which were present in the sample but already starting to break down. We'll have to send the samples off to our specialist DNA analyst. They'll extract the DNA and analyse it and use it for DNA profiling. It may take several days, if not a week or so, for the results to be back, especially if the culprit used bleach to try and clean it up, because that can degrade the DNA, so we'll have to be patient and wait. It was getting dark outside, and Mia couldn't believe how fast the time had flown. But she was adamant she wanted to finish the last investigation before they went home. the soil analysis. Chapter 9. Soil analysis. Mia unpacked the sample containers from the mud and collected from the wall. Her dad directed them to hold the samples up and examine the colour, texture and anything they could see mixed in with the soil. "It's kind of reddish-brown," Mia noted, though she wasn't sure if it was because of the small pieces of what looked like leaves mixed in with it. Next, Mia's dad prepared the soil onto slides. Then they used a special microscope called a comparison microscope to look at the soil and compare it with the other slides of the soil that were labelled with the types they knew. Looking through the microscope, the sample soil had very fine particles. When Mia compared it with the other slides, it became clear that it was a type of clay soil. They looked closer to see if they could find any trace evidence mixed in with the soil, such as hairs or fibres, but there was none to be seen. Lastly, we're going to pH test the soil. This will help confirm if it's clay and can also help to be compared with any location soils found, if needed. They mixed the sample with some water, then they dipped the litmus test strip in. It was like magic, watching the colour appear through the test. It shone green and matched with a pH score of 6. This they noted down. Mia couldn't help feeling disappointed. After a whole day of very hard work, it didn't feel like they were any closer to solving the crime. Max's dad reassured them, however, that they were starting to build a picture and that everything they'd done was important. They cleaned the equipment they'd used and then locked up the lab. Mia was so tired on the way home, she couldn't help but fall asleep in the van. She dreamed of chasing giant boots with a magnifying glass round and round the deck of an old warship. Gently Max shook her awake. "You're home now, Mia?" She yawned and stretched. "Thank you for letting us help you with the investigation today." "Thank you for your help. I hope it's giving you a better idea of everything we do." "Yes, I can't wait to train to be a forensic scientist myself." After dinner, Mia went straight to bed. She was too tired to even tell her family all the things that she'd seen and done at the crime scene and the lab. She wondered where the painting was now, but most of all she wondered how the person managed to get to the painting, take it off the wall, and then remove it from the building, all without it triggering the alarms. Also, why did they wear shoes that were too big for them? She pictured someone scaling the museum wall, and something just didn't seem right. Surely the too big shoes would have made it hard to climb properly. She snuggled into her pillow under her warm duvet, and before she had time to question it any further, she fell fast asleep. Suspect interviews. Name: Sarah Shenanigans. Role: Museum Director. SS. First, can I just say I don't approve of how this investigation has been handled. Not in the slightest. It is quite improper having children working at a crime scene, and I intend to put in a complaint as soon as we're finished here. DCI. You seem quite upset. SS. Would you not be? This is my reputation at stake. DCI. When did you last see the painting? SS. I held a private viewing last night with several important art enthusiasts and then left the museum at 11 p.m. for the security guard to lock up. DCI. And where were you the rest of the night until the discovery of the painting? SS. Surely you are not insinuating that I had anything to do with the theft? This is harassment. DCI. We're making inquiries to establish a timeline. I'm sure you're as dedicated as we are to finding the missing painting. SS. Yes! Well, of course! DCI. So your movements in the night in question? SS. I returned back to my home at 11:30 p.m. and stayed there for the rest of the night until I received the phone call in the morning that the painting had been stolen. DCI. And was anyone with you? SS. No, I'm a single woman, not that it's a crime, is it? DCI. No, of course not. And can you think of anyone who could be responsible for the theft? SS. Well, it's obvious, isn't it? It must be Mike, the security guard. Why else did the alarms not work? DCI. Right, thank you for your time. We will contact you if we have any further questions. Alibi, none. Home alone. Name, Fred Fowler. Role, museum janitor. DCI. Good morning, Mr. Fowler. FF. DCI. You don't seem too happy to be here this morning. FF. Well, you wouldn't be, would you? DCI. Surely you want to help recover the painting, Mr. Fowler? FF. I just want to mind my own business and be left alone. DCI. I see you have a previous record, Mr. Fowler. FF. I set up. Not that I trust any of you lot to believe me. DCI. And what was it you were set up for? FF. You have all the information in front of you, surely? DCI. I'd like to hear it in your own words, Mr. Fowler. FF. I was charged with shoplifting, but I did pay for the clothes. The stupid till assistant didn't give me a receipt. DCI. Uh-huh. So you're no stranger to being on the wrong side of the law. FF. I set up. DCI. Right, of course. So when did you last see the painting? FF. I had to clean up the mess from those rich slobs and finished cleaning the gallery at 11:45 p.m. I put my mops and equipment away and went to sleep in my bunk in the boiler room at 12 a.m. DCI. You sleep at the museum? FF. Yes. DCI. And you didn't see or hear anything? FF. Nothing at all. I did my rounds in the morning and realised the painting was missing at 6:20 a.m. and went straight to ring the police. DCI. I can see you placed the call at 6:23. FF. Yes. DCI. I think that's it for today, Mr. Fowler, but please don't leave town. Alibi. None. In the basement alone. Name, Mike Murphy. Role, security guard. DCI. Good morning, Mike. Can I call you Mike? Mike is fine. DCI. We have a few questions to ask you today. Anything I can do to help? DCI. Well, shall we start with why you believe the alarm systems weren't triggered when the painting was stolen? Well, yeah. I've been thinking about this. I reckon there must have been some super technological skills, right? Like they must have super hacking skills and overridden the system. DCI. So you believe someone hacked into the system and disabled the alarms? Yeah, yes, like that's the only thing that makes sense, right? DCI. And when did you enable the internal alarms? Well, the people who did the private viewings left at around 11, and then old Fred went around doing his cleaning. I went around doing my final checks of the windows and doors and enabled the alarm at 12 a.m. DCI. And you didn't disable it at all the entire night? What, me? No, of course not. DCI. Will you look at this image for me and for the purpose of the recording describe what you see? DCI. Can you explain what you see, please? It's a pizza delivery guy. DCI. Right. And where are they arriving? The gallery. DCI. And what is the date and time stamps on this image? Okay, I admit it. Disable the alarms at 2 a.m. so that I could open the doors, get my pizza delivery. It's not a crime to want to eat, is it? DCI. You do realise you lied to us earlier. I think you need to be very sensible now, Mike, and tell us the truth of what happened. I didn't want to lose my job. DCI. You could lose more than your job for lying to the police and wasting our time, especially if you're responsible for such a serious crime. I wasn't! I swear! Look, this is what happened. I was super hungry on my shift and, well, look, I don't normally do this, so you have to believe me. DCI. Just tell us what happened, Mr. Murphy. I got hungry and ordered in pizza. When it arrived, I disabled the alarm so that I could open the door to get it. But all the other doors were locked, I swear, and I locked the entrance as soon as I had the pizza. I didn't let anyone in. DCI. So why, Mr. Murphy, did the alarm system not get activated again until 6 a.m? DCI. Mr. Murphy, you've gone very pale. DCI. Please will you answer the question? I didn't do it, I swear. DCI. Please, can you answer the question? Why did you not reactivate the alarms again until 6 a.m? I fell asleep. DCI. Sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you repeat it out louder? I fell asleep. I got my pizza and began eating it whilst heading back to the security room. But after the second slice, I was so tired that I fell asleep as soon as I sat in the chair. When I woke up the next morning and saw on the monitors that the painting was gone, I panicked. I reactivated the alarms and hoped no one would guess what had happened. DCI. So you saw the painting was missing at 6 a.m. and did nothing? I was still really groggy. It was so weird, it felt like I'd spent the night out drinking. DCI. Is it normal for you to fall asleep that fast? No, never. I've never fallen asleep on a shift before, ever. I swear. DCI. That's interesting. Do you have any of the remains of the pizza left? Why do you want it? DCI. Did you often order pizzas and disable the alarms? Think seriously before you answer, Mr. Murphy. I may have done it, once or twice. Okay, I did it every night shift, but I always turned the alarms back on as soon as I was in the security booth. I've never fallen asleep before. DCI. And did you always order from the same pizza takeaway? Yes, a pizza. DCI. And is it always the same delivery person? No, it's through the delivery app, so it's always different people. DCI. Right, we are going to need your phone as evidence, and have to have the name of the person who delivered the pizza. How can this be relevant? DCI. There's a chance, Mr. Murphy, that your pizza was drugged to make you fall asleep. Someone must have known your movements and used it to their advantage. We will ask you to stay in contact until we've located the pizza for testing. Drugged? You think I was drugged? DCI. You fell asleep as soon as you ate the pizza, so quickly you couldn't activate the alarms. This was unusual behaviour for you and coincided with the theft of the painting. Am I going to die? DCI. Mr. Murphy, you are fully awake now and show no signs of illness, but we'll do a blood test and a full physical just to check you out, although the medicine they use is probably out of your system now. Alibi. Possibly drugged and asleep. Name. Daphne Doris. Role. Museum guide. DCI. Good morning, Mrs. Doris. DD. Good morning, Ducky. It's Daphne, please. DCI. Daphne, can you tell me your role at the museum? DD. Oh, I love my job. I've been doing it for 40 years since the museum opened. Can you believe it? I remember when Warrington was still a small village, and now it's so large I wouldn't even recognise it if I hadn't lived here my whole life. And DCI. Please, Daphne, can we stay with the question? Your role at the museum? DD. Oh, sorry, I'm such a silly goose. Yes, well, I'm a museum guide, young man, and I get to talk to people about the paintings and other exhibits. Sometimes I sit in a chair by the door and wait for people's questions and keep an eye to make sure everyone behaves themselves. But sometimes I like to walk around and talk to those who are having a look. DCI. And when did you last see the painting, The Fighting Temeraire? DD. Well, they were doing a private viewing last night, but they asked me to leave at closing, which I thought was a bit rude, don't you think, young man? I know much more about the painting than any of the others, and I love an excuse to get all dressed up and was planning to go down to town to get a new dress. But then they told me I wasn't invited. So rude! DCI. So the last time you saw the painting? DD. Oh, yes, well, it was as the museum closed at around 5 p.m. I was feeling a bit miffed at not being invited to the party, so I decided I'd make myself something nice for dinner to cheer myself up and treat my granddaughter Layla as she worked so hard. DCI. Right. So after leaving the museum, what were your movements? DD. My movements, ducky? Well, I was walking. DCI. Where did you go? DD. Oh, well, I went down to the butcher's and got some mince, and then I stopped to talk to Fran, the flower stand lady, and she agreed with me that it was rude that I wasn't invited to the party, especially as I'd worked there for so long. Fran's such a dull, having a terrible time, though, with her knee, and the doctors are being so slow about sorting it out for her. Such a shame, especially with her grandson, Isaac, now toddling about, and waiting for her to play with him. Do you have any children, young man? DCI. Please, can you stick to the questions, Daphne? DD. Oh, right, sorry, I do like to talk. DCI. So after your conversation with Fran... DD. Right, yes, well then, I went home and made a lovely shepherd's pie. It was my Layla's favourite. My trick is to put 3 different cheeses in the mashed potato and a spoonful of mustard, and then I... DCI. And what do you do for the rest of the evening? Please just stick to the relevant facts. DD. Sorry, I'm such a silly sausage. Yes, well, Layla came home at 7. She's such a good girl. She works so hard and looks after me. Grandchildren are the greatest blessing, aren't they? Oh, right, I can see by your face, Inspector, I'm blabbering on again. Yes, well, she came home at 7 and we had dinner together. Then I went down for a nap, and that was the night. DCI. And Layla can corroborate that you were there the entire night. DD. Oh, yes, she likes to stay close in case I need anything. Such a good girl. DCI. I think that's everything we need for the time being. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Doris. DD. Oh, no worries at all. I've always wondered what it's like being inside the police station. I said to myself, Daphne, just imagine you're going inside to talk to the police, just like being on telly. Who knows? Maybe I could help break the case. Alibi. At home with granddaughter. Name. William Withersby III. Role. Art curator. DCI. Good afternoon, Mr. Withersby. WW. Good afternoon. DCI. Please can you tell us about your role at the museum? WW. Yes, well, could I have a drink of water, please? It's very, dry in here, isn't it? DCI. Yes, I'll go get you one. Here you go. WW. Many thanks. DCI. So, your role at the museum? WW. Yes, I'm, the museum curator. So, I, help source artworks for the museum. DCI. So you were responsible for the loan of the painting, The Fighting Temeraire? WW. Yes, I arranged for the loan from the National Gallery. My friend Hubert is the curator there and helped to agree to a month's residence at our museum. DCI. And how do you know Hubert? WW. Oh, he's a spliffing good chap. We went to university together at Cambridge. DCI. Whose idea was it for the loan of the painting? WW. Well, it was mine, you see. It's always been one of my favourite artworks, and I wanted to create an exhibition of Turner's works for the people of Warrington. DCI. And when was the last time you saw the painting? WW. It must have been 11, just last night. We had a private viewing before the big opening on Saturday. DCI. And how did the evening go? WW. It was a delight. Probably one of the highlights of my career. I was hoping with my connections and abilities it might lead to a promotion to a larger art gallery, like the National Gallery. DCI. You're not happy in your current job role? WW. Oh, I am, but one does sometimes wonder about moving upwards to somewhere with a bit more prestige and a larger budget for more famous artworks. We tend to have more obscure artists displayed here. DCI. And where did you go after the gallery? WW. Well, I went home and had a nightcap with Hubert, who was staying with me, and then we went to bed. DCI. And Hubert stayed the entire night? WW. Yes. I have an alarm on the front door, so I set that around 1 a.m, and then we both retired, and it certainly didn't go off. DCI. And it was still activated in the morning? WW. Yes, and Hubert doesn't have the code, so he didn't leave the house. Alibi. At home with a friend. Name. Hubert Hathaway. Role. Curator at the National Gallery, London. DCI. Good afternoon, Mr. Hathaway. We heard that you attended the private viewing last night and helped liaise the loan from the National Gallery to Warrington's Gallery. HH. Yes, indeed. I'm terribly shocked by this awful crime. I was given every assurance they had top-of-the-range security systems and that it would be completely secure. DCI. You seem very distressed, Mr. Hathaway. HH. I am. This is the nation's favourite painting. I was the person who approved the loan, and the National Gallery will hold me responsible. The whole world will hold me responsible. DCI. When did you last see the painting, Mr. Hathaway? HH. We left the museum at 11 and stopped off at the shops to pick up some whisky. We then went to William's house and retired in the early hours to bed. DCI. And by we, you mean William Withersby? HH. Yes. DCI. Did either you or Mr. Withersby leave the house during the night? HH. No, we stayed the entire night and didn't wake until 7 a.m. when the phone rang. William received the call and came running into the guest room and told me the distressing news. DCI. Thank you, Mr. Hathaway. I think that would be it for the time being. Alibi. At a friend's house, Mr. Witherby. Chapter 10. Return of the painting. Mia was woken the next morning by the ringing phone. She cracked open one eye and peered at the clock and groaned. It was only 7:30. Who was ringing at this time of the morning? The ring stopped as her mother answered, and she was about to try and fall back to sleep when she heard her name being called loudly from the corridor downstairs. I'm coming, moaned Mia. She pulled on her dressing gown to try and keep out the chill of the January morning, and shoved her feet in her slippers. It's Max, her mum mouthed as she passed over the receiver. Mia felt a sudden rush of excitement flash through her. Why would Max be ringing this early, especially after such a late night, unless he had something very important to tell her? Mia, the painting's been returned, Mia. Somehow the person got back into the museum last night and returned the painting and left a note. What? Mia screeched. Why would someone go to all the trouble of stealing a painting only to return it again? We're getting ready to go back over there now. We need to collect more evidence. But why, if the painting's back? Surely the investigation is over now. Someone still stole the painting, and the police think they drugged the security guard as well, so it's a crime in itself. Did you want to come? Mia suddenly felt very alert and very awake. Yes, of course. I'll get dressed now. She raced upstairs, shouting at her mum that she had to go back to the crime scene. Quickly she dressed in the clothes she wore yesterday, which she'd left lying on the bedroom floor, and looked around for a hairband to tie up her hair. By the time she raced back downstairs, her mum was thrusting some toast wrapped in kitchen paper at her with a bottle of water. "Thanks, Mum!" She reached up and gave her mum a kiss on the cheek, and then sped to the door to get her shoes on as she saw the lights of the van light up the drive. The morning was still dark, and she knew it was another cold day, so she grabbed her coat and tried to juggle it with her food and bottle whilst her mum helped her opening the door, laughing. "I've never seen you so excited before, Mia." "I just love it, Mum. Yesterday was one of the best days ever." In the van, Max's dad explained what the police had told him about the return painting. Apparently, the security guard had been so scared after being told he'd been drugged the previous night, he'd forgotten to return for his shift, and once again the alarm system hadn't been properly activated. "We need to locate the pizza he ate the night before last to take some evidence and test for drugs. We also need to re-photograph the scene and see if there's anything that stands out to compare it with yesterday. The letter needs to be photographed and bagged as evidence, and we need to fully inspect every room in the museum. I also have my suspicions about the window entry." They pulled up to the museum car park, and it felt like deja vu as they got dressed again in their PPE. This time, at the door of the museum, they were greeted by the Detective Inspector of the Investigation, DCI Green. "Right this way, Mr. Robbins." They entered the security office, and the place was a mess. There was empty food packets and bottles lying about everywhere. "It's a surprise there hasn't been a break-in sooner," DCI Green sneered, looking around at the mess. On the desk was an open pizza box, revealing a pizza with 2 pieces missing. It looked stale, with the crust hardened and the cheese congealed, as if it had been sat there for a while. They sat about photographing the whole area before they could touch anything. "The pizza, we believed, is the drugged one, so we will bag that separately, but we need to test all the other packets as well, just to be sure." Once everything was bagged up and carried down to the van, the room looked a lot cleaner. They began checking for fingerprints, which there were lots of. Practically every surface had prints on. The computer keys, desk and door handles were so covered some of the prints were overlapping. Finally, they were finished and they could move on to the gallery. Mia couldn't believe she was finally going to see the Fighting Temerae. She found it a lot more interesting now, and she still couldn't understand why someone would go to all the hassle to take it, only to return it again. Chapter 11. The Fighting Temerae. They entered the room and stopped, admiring the painting in all its beauty. It sat perfectly on the wall, as if it had never been moved. Once again they photographed everything, before moving closer to get a clearer look at the notes stuck to the bottom of the frame. "I wanted to prove I could do the impossible, and I have. I took the Fighting Temerae, and I returned it. Maybe you need a new security guard." The whole situation seemed weirder and weirder. Mia looked at the note and noticed at the bottom was the Warrington Gallery's logo. She pointed it out to Max and his dad. "It would appear someone wrote the note on the museum stationery. We have to take any stationery here at the museum and any pens we can find so that we can compare the ink." They dusted the room for prints and checked for trace evidence. Then they went from room to room, testing all the other spaces in the museum. It was in the director, Sarah Shenanigan's office, that they found what they were looking for. There on the desk was a notepad with the same logo as the note. It also had the impressions of the note left on the top page of the pad. They collected it as evidence, as well as the pens in the pen pot. Then they collected more evidence in the room. In the bin they found a half-eaten apple with clear bite marks on the side of it. By the time they'd finished collecting all the evidence from across the museum, the sun was already setting. Mia hoped that tonight they would make sure the alarms were properly set, and that no more paintings would go walkabout. She was packing up the equipment bags when Max's dad asked Max to help him bag up the painting. Mia was shocked. After all this hard work to get the painting back, why would they now remove it from the exhibition? It's evidence, Max's dad explained. We also have to check that it's the real painting and not a fake or replica. Mia hadn't considered that the person might have returned a fake in its place. Why go to all the bother? As much as Mia enjoyed the lab work, she was glad that they were going to wait until the following morning so that she could get some rest. She was exhausted after 2 full days of evidence collecting and analysing, but couldn't wait to find out what the next day was going to bring. Chapter 12. Return to the lab. As Mia, Max and Max's dad returned to the lab the following day, he explained that an art specialist was studying the painting to see if they could authenticate it as the real painting. They arrived to find the art authenticator, Louise Letterman, already at the lab. She was holding a magnifying glass up to the painting and moving slowly over it. She jumped as she entered the room, clearly not expecting to be disturbed. So, Louise, do we have a verdict yet? It's very clever, probably one of the best I've ever seen, but I do believe it is, in fact, a fake. I knew it, breathed Max's dad. If you look here and compare it with these photographs of the original painting, you can see the brushstrokes are slightly different. Also, the colour in this part of the ship are very slightly off. Mia couldn't believe it. To her, the painting looked exactly the same as the painting in the photograph. Louise sure had some talent to be able to see the smallest of differences, like the most difficult spot the difference puzzle Mia had ever seen. But there's one more thing I want to check. I want to see if it proves my theory that it's indeed a fake created by the renowned Dustin Dastardly. Louise picked up a UV light, much like the one Max's dad had used in the equipment bag. She slowly moved the torch over the painting, pausing, before she came to the bottom right-hand corner. She turned and winked at the kids, whispering, "Watch this," and then continued to shine her torch. There, before their eyes, just like magic, appeared the signature of 2 interlocking Ds. Just what I thought! This is Dustin Dastardly's calling card. This is, without a doubt, a fake. Mia kept looking between the fake and the photograph of the original painting. She really couldn't see any differences between the 2 images. So now we know this painting is a fake, and the search is still on for the original. Well, we have a lot of work to do, but first I must call DCI Green to inform him of the news. Max's dad moved into the office at the far end of the room and shut the door. Today there was a lot more forensic scientists in the office, all working through swabbing and examining the different pieces of evidence that they had collected the previous day. As Max's dad returned, he was rubbing his hands. Right, guys, everyone is working very hard on all the evidence we collected. But we're going to do the 2 fun bits, testing the pizza for drugs and testing the ink and analysing the letter. I have a feeling it will reveal some interesting results. Mia couldn't help but feel relieved. It'd be a lot more interesting testing for poisons and analysing the note than examining rubbish all day. Chapter 13. Poison Testing. First, Max's dad opened up the pizza box and got them all to wear gloves and safety goggles. They looked closely at the pizza. We need to see if there's any obvious signs of contamination, like powders or evidence of crushed up pills. The pizza was a cheese and pepperoni, and they looked closely all over the top of the pizza, but there weren't any obvious signs of anything outside of what you'd expect. Next, Max's dad sniffed closely over the pizza, testing for specific smells. He said there wasn't anything above the expected. Then they began dissecting the pizza, first removing the pepperoni and then the cheese layer. Each section they placed in separate sample containers. Underneath the cheese layer, Max's dad carefully moved the sauce around. Does anything look unusual to you about this sauce? Mia looked closely at the sauce. She wasn't sure, but it looked like there were very small white specks in amongst the red sauce. "Is it mould?" she asked. Max's dad prepared a slide with a sample of sauce and then placed it under the microscope. They took it in turns to examine the sauce under the microscope. It was clear that they were definitely white particles mixed in amongst the sauce. He then took another sample and gave it to another forensic scientist named Rick. He's going to run further tests on the substance and see if he can determine what drug was used. Mia moved over to the evidence board and wrote under the pizza that the sauce was contaminated with a drug substance. Then Max went and collected the letter sample. This was the piece of evidence Mia had been most looking forward to analysing. Chapter 14. Ink and Handwriting Analysis. First, they had a close look at the letter. Examining the ink used, as well as how the letters were written. The ink was black and spread rather thickly. The letters were small and not clearly written. Then they moved the letter under the microscope. Under high magnification, the ink showed up in ways Mia never would have believed. In fact, she leaned back to look at the letter close up against the microscope to see if it looked the same now that she knew what to look for. But without the microscope, these details were hidden. Small black dots of different size made up the ink, and there are also concentric rings amongst the ink. The edges of the letters looked fanned out, as if the ink was spreading out, creating an ombre effect. Mia explained all that she could see to Max's dad. After Max had a look and confirmed he saw the same things, his dad then explained what this meant. The small black dots were particles of the ink pigments. The concentric circles were evaporation marks from where the solvent in the ink dried and evaporated. The ombre effect was caused by the ink flow from the pen. All these characteristics, Max's dad explained, meant the pen used to write the letter was most likely a fountain pen. They examined the pens from Director Shenanigan's office. There's a number of ballpoint pens, which seemed to be the standard supplies found in other places around the museum. But they also found one pen which was different. It was in a special box, and which was initialed in gold, the letters SS. The pen inside was a fountain pen, and sure enough contained black ink. Mia pulled off a sample of the notebook paper and wrote the message out again using the same letters. When they compared the ink to that of the original letter, the characteristics were the same. To make sure, they tried out the different pens and pencils and looked at them under the microscope. These looked completely different to the original and the fountain pen. "I knew it was that horrible Sarah Shenanigans!" Mia felt so proud they'd cracked the case. Hold on, Max's dad said, holding up his hands. "We know that the pen and paper used were from Director Shenanigan's office, but there isn't enough evidence that she wrote them." "Oh, come on, Dad! It all adds up!" Max tried to reason with his dad. "We know that the person who broke in used shoes too big for their feet, like a woman trying to hide her feet. She also knew about the painting and had access to the painting in the museum. It must be her." "Before we run away with ourselves, let's first examine the handwriting and then fingerprint check the pen." No fingerprints turned up on the pen, which Mia wasn't surprised about. Director Shenanigans was much too clever for that. Although she did wonder why she'd used paper from her own office. Surely she must have realised they'd follow the clues. Max's dad returned with several printouts. These are the signatures of the different people the police interviewed. Let's see if Sarah Shenanigans matches with the handwriting on the letter. They looked at the letter and Sarah's signature. It was clear straight away that the handwriting was completely different. Sarah Shenanigan's writing was a lot larger, with clear letters and big emphasised loops on the tails of the letters, with trailing sections like G and Y. Mia sighed. It seemed like they'd finally cracked the case, but now it looked like the person who returned the fake painting had deliberately tried to frame director shenanigans. Max had continued to look at the different signatures. "Hang on a moment. Have a look at this one." He slid over one of the statements and pointed at the signature. Both Mia and Max's dad looked closely between it and the letter. Then they moved nearer and looked between both again. "It's the same writing. Look how they made a line for the dots for the eyes." They checked out the matching letters from both writings, and every time they were formed in exactly the same way. "This is it! This is the smoking gun!" exclaimed Max. "The person who wrote the letter and replaced the painting was William Withersby!" they all shouted at once. Second interview. Name: William Withersby. DCI. "So, Mr. Withersby, it seems you have some explaining to do." WW. "I've told you everything I know." DCI. "So where were you on the night of Monday the 8th of January? WW. "I've already told you. I was with my friend Hubert." DCI. "No, Mr. Withersby. That was what you claimed to be doing on the night of Sunday the 7th of January. We want to know what you were doing the following evening." WW. I... DCI. "You've gone very pale, Mr. Withersby." WW. "Honestly, I was at home the whole night." DCI. "You're a smart man, Mr. Withersby. You know lying to the police will only get you in even more trouble." WW. Okay. You've got to understand, it's all Director Shenanigan's fault. She never leaves enough in the budget, and I did everything I could to arrange the loan of the Fighting Temerae, and she still didn't thank me." DCI. "So you stole the painting to teach her a lesson?" WW. No, I never stole the painting. I have no idea who did that. I worked so hard and staked my whole career on that painting. I wouldn't have done anything to threaten it." DCI. "What are you saying, Mr. Withersby?" WW. "I didn't arrange the insurance. Director Shenanigans didn't provide enough to cover the insurance, and when I asked for more, she said I had to find it myself. I've never had any problems with any of the paintings before, so I thought it'd be safe." DCI. "You didn't arrange the insurance for the world-famous painting?" WW. "No, and it's my greatest shame. I faked the insurance letter to the National Gallery so that they would approve the transfer. But then I heard the painting was stolen. I knew I would be to blame. I would be ruined. I'd lose everything I own just to start repaying the National Gallery for the painting. So I had to do something. I don't know if you're aware, but there are a number of fake replicas of the Fighting Temerae. I owned one. I always loved that painting. So I used my employee pass to get access to the museum and place my own copy of the painting in its spot. Then, in case people wanted answers, I left a note using Director Shenanigan's paper and pen. If someone is to be blamed for this mess, it should be her." DCI. "Mr. Withersby, I'm now going to charge you with tampering with police evidence." WW. "But I told you the truth. I was just trying to make it better. And who would ever know or be harmed? They wanted a painting, and I provided them with a painting." DCI. "You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence." Chapter 15. Examining the evidence. After informing the police of their discovery with the handwriting on the letter, Max's dad had returned Mia home. She told her family over dinner all about the developments. It looked like the case was finished. They'd followed the clues and solved the crime. Now all they needed was for William Witherspoon to confess to where he'd hidden the real painting, and then everything would be well. That night she went to bed and slept soundly. She didn't believe how much she'd enjoyed learning and working alongside Max's dad. She hoped he might let them work on other cases in the future. She wasn't expecting the phone call the next morning. Max informed her that Mr. Witherspoon had confessed to replacing the painting with a fake and to writing the letter. But he was adamant he hadn't stolen the original painting. And he still had an alibi for the night, a very angry alibi, on hearing that he'd been lied to about the insurance, but an alibi all the same. Max and Mia met up to go over the case together. His dad had explained that they wouldn't be allowed to go to work with him today, as he had a series of important meetings to go over the evidence collected so far with the police. Luckily, Mia had made detailed notes about all the evidence they'd found, and the procedures they'd learned about, in her notebook, as well as the photographs of the crime scene, caseboard, and the interview transcript she had recorded on her phone. They printed out the photographs and cleared a space on the wall in Mia's bedroom. Then they created a replica of the crime board on the wall. Then she wrote out a timeline of events as she knew them. Sunday the 7th of January. The Fighting Temerae arrived at Warrington Gallery. 5 p.m. Daphne Doris Museum Guide leaves. 9 p.m. Private viewing of the painting. 11 p.m. Director Shenanigans, William Witherspoon and Hubert Hathaway leave the museum. 11 p.m. The security guard, Mike, locks the museum doors. Monday the 8th of January. 12 a.m. The janitor, Fred Fowler, does his last rounds and goes to the bunk in the boiler room. 12:30 a.m. Mike sets the museum alarms. 2 a.m. Mike disarms the alarms so that he can open the door and get his pizza. Within minutes he falls asleep. 6 a.m. Mike awakens and realises the painting is missing and resets the alarm. 6:30 a.m. Fred Fowler discovers the painting is missing. 6:33 a.m. Fred Fowler rings the police to inform them of the theft. 11 p.m. William Witherspoon returns to the museum with his fake painting and writes the letter. He uses his staff pass to enter. Evidence. Fingerprint, Fred Fowler. Hair, unknown. Footprint. Male, size 12, Timberland Pro boots, but foot believed to be smaller. Soil was clay. Tool marks. A 16-inch crowbar size match. Pizza. Sauce drugged with white tablets. Painting. Fake, originally painted by D.D. Ink on note. Fountain pen from Director Shenanigan's office. Handwriting. William Witherspoon. So looking at this, someone probably stole the painting between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m, Mia added, that to a post-it note and stuck it on the timeline. I keep coming back to why someone would wear 2 big shoes and how they managed to climb the wall to do so. Also, why wasn't there any mud marks on the inside of the wall? I was thinking that as well. I think we should go back to the area and take a sample of the mud next to the footprint to see if it's the same as the clay mud from the wall. Mia and Max jumped onto their bikes and raced over to Max's house. His dad always kept some sample pots there, and they also grabbed some gloves and evidence bags. Next, they cycled over to the museum. With all the investigations going on, it had been decided to keep the museum shut so that everything was quiet. They walked around the back and crouched down by the mud and collected some soil near to where the impression was. Straight away Mia could tell that it looked completely different. They continued to walk around the area and came to the door where the security guard had received the pizza. They saw that it had an electronic pass key to allow employees access. This must be where William Withersby entered to return the painting. "Hello, duckies! What are you two doing round here?" They turned round to see an elderly lady standing behind them. "Hi, we're part of the investigation team. We were following up on some evidence," smiled Max. My, aren't you a little young to be working with the police?" "Yes, but my dad is the lead crime scene investigator." "Oh, aren't you lucky?" "Excuse me, but why are you round the back here?" asked Mia. "Oh, I work here. I've been a museum guide here for the last 40 years. Can you believe that? This is the most excitement we've ever had." "Is this where the employees enter the building?" "Oh, yes, lamb. This is the employees' entrance. They've used all the newfangled technology now. What's wrong with a good lock and key? That's what I've always said. We've never had any paintings go missing when we used to have a key and the door was unlocked for us each morning." "So how do you get in now?" "Well, we have these employee pass cards. You scan them, here, look, and then it lets you in." "I'm still trying to get used to it, though, as they only gave out the cards last month. It all seems a bit simple to me, I must say. That's what I said to my neighbour Betty. 'Betty,' I said, 'there's sure to be trouble with all this new technology.'" Mia looked at Max. This lady sure liked to talk, and they had a feeling they would be here all day listening to her. "Right, my sweetie pies, can I get you some biscuits or cake and a nice cup of tea?" Max looked like he was going to refuse, but Mia wondered if there might be some information they were missing that Mrs. Chatterbox could fill them in on. She poured them all a mug of piping hot tea and then cut them each a generous wedge from the large chocolate cake in the cafe. "Might as well use this up. That's what I said to myself. No point it going off and having it go in the bin. I was going to collect all the cakes up and take them to the seniors' coffee meeting this afternoon. They do like cake there, especially Phyllis," I said to myself. "I'm sure that Phyllis will want a slice of each cake just to herself. But you both look like you can use a slice." Thank you, Mrs. Doris. You must love art to have worked here for so long." "Oh, yes, I do, my cherub. I've always loved art. But we couldn't afford for me to go to college when I was young. Instead, I had to leave school and work to help support my family. Then when I had my children and they started school, the job came up here to work as a museum guide. I just knew I had to apply. Now I get to see art every day and talk to people about it. And the arty gene must have passed on through the family, as my daughter is a painter herself and one of my grandsons is an art dealer. He was the first member of the family to go to university. So proud of our George I am. Although I do wish he'd marry and settle down. Did I tell you how many grandchildren I have? 10. Can you believe that? It's a lot of Christmas presents, I can tell you that." Mia was finding it hard to keep track of the conversation. She wasn't sure if she'd ever met someone before who could talk so much and for so long without interruption. "Would you like a hand boxing up the cakes?" she asked. "Oh, dearie me, that's awfully kind of you, lovey. People are always saying how horrible the youth of today are, but you two aren't at all. You're both such darlings. It's so important to have manners, isn't it? I think they're so underrated today. People just seem to want to have minimum interaction with others nowadays, and no one seems to have time for others any more. You think with all these phones and things everyone has now, no one would ever get lonely again, but it seems we talk less and less." At this Mrs. Doris looked sad. She sniffed and then secured the lid on the last cake. "Are you okay, Mrs. Doris?" "Oh, yes, my sweetheart, I most certainly am. I'm lucky that my granddaughter Layla lives with me now and keeps me company. She's such a good girl, not like my other grandchildren. Alfie went travelling around Australia last year, and I still haven't had so much as a postcard from him." Mia had a feeling they were about to get a biography of all 10 grandchildren and looked at her watch. It was already past lunchtime and they still needed to analyse the new soil samples. "I'm afraid we really do need to go now, Mrs. Doris." "Oh, of course you do. Well, you're both always welcome here. Just ask for old Daphne, and I'll slip you a piece of cake." She winked at them and then carried the cake boxes out to the car. The kids jumped on their bikes and cycled back to Mia's home. She pulled out the microscope she'd been given as a distant great-aunt one Christmas and set it up. After creating a slide in the way that Max's dad had in the lab, they looked at the sample of the soil. It looked completely different. It was a paler colour than the clay soil, more yellow than red in colour, and the particles also looked larger under the microscope. They found the soil index on Google and compared their soil to the ones on the index. They didn't have the sample slides to compare the sample to, but they were pretty sure that they collected was sandy soil and not clay soil. So the soil on the walls wasn't left there from the shoe imprint, or soil from the site. This just seemed to be getting stranger and stranger. Chapter 16. Digital Forensics. Just then, Max's mobile rang. It was his dad, ready to fill them in on the details. They told him about their day's work and the findings with the soil. This adds to my suspicion about the point of entry," Max's dad replied. "I think that the point of entry was staged to make it look like a break-in. I don't believe that's how they entered at all." "But why would someone go to all the trouble to fake the entry point?" Mia asked. "It seemed like a lot of effort and must have taken a considerable amount of time." "I think they're trying to throw us off the investigation and distract us from how they actually entered the museum. The police have learnt that there is an entry key point for the employees." Yes, there is. We used it today with Daphne and Doris, the museum guide." "You shouldn't really have entered the museum. It could still contain evidence we don't want to contaminate. Mrs. Doris should have been told employees were expected to stay out." The kids looked at each other guiltily. They remembered their promise not to do anything to do with the scene without asking first, but they had thought it'd be okay because old Mrs. Doris was already going inside, and they'd only gone directly to the cafe. "We're sorry, Dad. We didn't know people weren't allowed inside." "Yes, well, what's done is done. The digital analysis is now examining all the computers and network logs at the museum, and we'll wait to see what they come back with. We also have some results back. The drugs in the pizza were the prescribed sleeping tablets, dariodoxient. The security guard is lucky he fell asleep before he ate too much, or he could have overdosed." "Someone at the pizza company must have made the pizza as a special order for it to be in the sauce," exclaimed Mia. "Yes, this has been what the police were investigating. Apparently, a pizza cook named Kyle was working that night, but hasn't returned to work since. There's also no log of the person who delivered the pizza. Apparently, the person assigned the delivery was told it had already been taken when he went to collect it from the restaurant. Sometimes drivers are double booked, so they didn't think anything of it until the police asked to interview them." "So it looks like Kyle was part of the conspiracy. He made up the drugged pizza and passed it to someone to deliver." "Yes, it certainly looks like that. Kyle had only been working there for the last month, and the police now believe he used the fake identity to get the job." Mia added the details to the crime board on the wall. It now looked like several people were involved in the theft of the painting, and that it had been planned for a while. "Dad, would it be okay if we came over to the lab to wait for the digital forensic results?" "I don't see why not." They grabbed their bicycles and sped over to the lab. They had a feeling that the digital forensics may reveal some clues that bring them closer to the truth of the missing fighting Temeray. Chapter 17. The results are in. As they entered the lab, they instantly knew that some sort of breakthrough had occurred. People seemed to be bustling around, even more active than usual, all in a jubilant manner. Martha, the secretary, ushered them into the office at the far end of the lab to wait for Max's dad. When the door opened, they could see the evidence board. There, underneath the digital files, was a list. Mia quietly went over to have a look at what was written and then took a photo on her phone. She quickly returned to the office to show Max. At first, they weren't quite sure what they were looking at. It just seemed to be a list of times and people's names. But then they saw a name they recognised, William Withersby, and then another, Daphne Doris. Looking at the times, they realised that this was the key pass entry list of when employees entered the museum. The dates and times suddenly made a lot more sense, and they scanned through the list until they found 080124, and the first name on the list dated at 3 a.m, Daphne Doris. It was the museum guide. They both looked at each other in stunned silence for a moment. How could the kind old lady who loved art be the person who drugged Mike and stole the painting? At that moment, Max's dad entered the office. I'm really sorry, guys. The digital pass key logs came through. Someone had attempted to delete them, but the forensics team were able to retrieve them from the hard drive. It appears that a museum guide opened the door of the employee access entrance around the crime time frame. But Dad, she's the lady we spoke to this morning. There's no way it could be her. She's so old and so lovely. People can put on all sorts of disguises and acts. Also, sometimes even the nicest of people do things they wouldn't normally contemplate because they're desperate. It turns out that the museum was making cutbacks and Mrs. Doris had been given her redundancy notice. Mia and Max both looked at each other in shock. But the hair, Dad, it wasn't grey at all, it was dark purple. It could be that the hair was from someone separate to the theft. The police have arrested Mrs. Doris and taken her in for questioning. In the meantime, we've been asked to run the forensics at her home. Can we come as well, Dad? Well, yes, of course. I wouldn't want to go without my trusty duo. They arrived at Mrs. Doris's modest terrace bungalow on the outskirts of Warrington. It was small, but looked well cared for, and when they entered, the place was clean and tidy. The living room contained a sofa, old-style television, and a bookcase with rows of photographs, each in different type of frames. There were more photographs on the walls. They began photographing the rooms to make sure that everything was preserved exactly as it was, before they touched anything. In the bathroom they found a bottle of tablets prescribed to Mrs. Doris for dariodoxant. It seemed more and more conclusive that the kindly Mrs. Doris was somehow a criminal mastermind. They examined every room, the police officers carefully opening cupboards and looking under the beds and in furniture for secret compartments. But there was no sign of the painting. They bagged up the toothbrushes in the bathroom and looked for digital equipment like phones or computers, but they couldn't find any. Finally, they came to the second bedroom. There wasn't much to reveal about the personality of its occupant. When Mrs. Doris's bedroom had been filled with yet more photographs and little knickknacks, this room was surprisingly bare. The wardrobe contained women's clothes and shoes. The dressing table had some mascara, lipstick, deodorant, and a hairbrush. Mia picked up the hairbrush. She carefully used her tweezers to extract one of the hairs caught in the bristles. It was dark purple. just like the hair at the museum. Second interview. Name: Daphne Doris. Statement 2. DCI. It appears you have some explaining to do, Mrs. Doris. DD. I really don't understand. I was having a lovely coffee social at the senior centre, and the next thing I know, the whole of Warrington police force seems to be outside. You all come barging in and put handcuffs on me. It was so embarrassing, completely mortifying. I'll never be able to show my face there again. DCI. Mrs. Doris, you can cut the pretence. We can see you entered the museum in the early hours of the 8th of January. DD. Me? No, of course I didn't. I couldn't. I was fast asleep from 10. I never stay awake later than that, now that I'm on these wonderful tablets the doctor prescribed. I used to have such difficulty getting to sleep before, but now I sleep like a baby. DCI. Mrs. Doris, the records don't lie. Please, look here. What does this highlighted record say? DD. It says that I entered the museum at 3 a.m. But you see, young sir, that's quite impossible, unless I've started walking about in my sleep. I was completely knocked out. Just ask my granddaughter. She brought me my hot cocoa and pills at 9:30, as she does every night. And I didn't wake until the next morning, when the sun had already risen. You see, it's a mistake. I always said there was nothing but trouble with all this technology. It's obviously glitched and created false records. DCI. Mrs. Doris, you must be aware that it is a crime to lie to the police. DD. Lie? Lie? Why would I lie? What business would I have to be going to the museum at 3 a.m? DCI. Why, indeed, especially in the night the painting was stolen. DD. Are you implying that I stole the painting? What would I want with that painting? Where would I even put it? I've always believed in art being in public museums so that everyone can appreciate it and be able to discuss it. DCI. A fine speech indeed, Mrs. Doris. Are those your sleeping tablets? DD. Yes. See, you have my tablets. Now you know I was asleep at that time. DCI. Mrs. Doris, these tablets are the ones that we used to drug the security guard Mike's pizza. DD. What? DCI. It's time to be honest with us. Who did you involve in poisoning Mike? This is very serious. He could have died. It's very important you tell us the truth now. It will look better to the judge if you cooperate. DD. The judge? The judge for what? I haven't done anything. DCI. Who helped you drug the pizza? DD. The pizza? What pizza? I don't know what you're talking about. DCI. Where is the painting? Have you sold it already? DD. I really don't understand. I'm not sure what you're talking about. The last time I saw the painting was Sunday, just before I left the museum. DCI. Well, who else would have access to your employee card? DD. My employee key card? But it isn't even missing. I always place it on the key dish by the front door, and I picked it up from right where I left it when I went to get the cakes for the social this morning. DCI. I'm pausing the recording to answer the knock at the door. DCI. I've returned and restarted the recording. DCI. Mrs. Doris, who else stays in your home with you? DD. Why, it's just me and my granddaughter Layla. She's a good girl. She looks after me and makes sure I never get lonely. DCI. And what colour is her hair? DD. Her hair? Why on earth would you want to know the colour of Layla's hair? DCI. Please answer the question, Mrs. Doris. DD. Well, She's naturally blonde, but she dyes it dark purple. DCI. Mrs. Doris, have you told Layla about the redundancy? DD. Yes, of course. I tell my Layla everything. She's such a good listener. She was so upset when she heard that I'd been made redundant. I mean, it's probably about time I retire, but I do so love my job. 40 years I've been there. Did I tell you that? 40 years. And they're making me redundant for budget cuts. I'm sure that Director Shenanigans is going to raise her own salary with my wage. I wouldn't put it past her. She never understood the importance of talking to the visitors at the museum and always lectures me about bothering people. DCI. Just to be clear, Mrs. Doris, your granddaughter also knew about the painting being loaned to the museum. DD. Oh, yes, of course. She was very excited. She had booked tickets to view it on opening day. I was going to give her a personal tour, and then we were going to have cake together in the cafe afterwards. She does so love to treat me. She's such a good girl, my Layla. Please, I don't understand what these questions have to do with anything. DCI. I think that's enough information for the moment. Interview terminated. Chapter 18. All the pieces come together. It was another day before the police located Layla. It seems that having driven past the bungalow while the crime scene investigators were at work, she quickly sped off. The police had checked their records with the DVLA to find her car registration, and then the use of various road cameras had managed to trace her car to a town 50 miles away called Clifton Ridge. Max's dad drove them down to the cabin that she'd been staying at with their trusty forensic science equipment. As they arrived, Mia examined the surrounding soil from the dirt road, which was churned up by all the cars. It was reddish in colour, much like the sample they'd taken from the wall. Max's dad observed as Mia carefully but expertly collected a sample and then labelled and bagged it. It seems we've made a forensic scientist out of you in record time, he said, sounding impressed. Inside the cabin they found a cupboard under the stairs full of tools, including a crowbar. In the rubbish bin that had been pulled to the side of the road and saved just in time from the garbage lorry which was about to collect the rubbish, they found the discarded boots, whose brand matched exactly with the brand predicted by the imprint found at the museum. It seemed that the attempts of the criminals to be crafty and mislead the police would be some of the most damning evidence against them. Arrested alongside Layla was a blond man. He gave his name as Alfie, but was soon confirmed to be the man who'd used the fake identity of Kyle to work at the pizza parlour. It seemed he'd gotten into trouble while travelling in Australia and had had his visa revoked, forcing him to return home early. The painting was nowhere to be seen, and Mia was scared that it had already been sold on. However, the digital forensics were able to weave their magic again, and through phone records managed to trace Layla's contact with her cousin George, the art dealer. He had brazenly had the painting displayed on the wall of his own house, having organised an auction of it on the black market. If it sold, then the family would have been very, very rich indeed. Daphne Doris was adamant that she knew nothing about the theft of the painting, and her grandchildren all said the same thing. Layla confessed that she'd been so enraged on hearing about her grandmother's redundancy from the job she loved so much that she decided to make them pay. She wanted to look after her grandmother and give her a taste of luxury. Layla admitted that on the night of the robbery she had given her grandmother her usual sleeping tablets at 9:30. Then she'd waited until she was deeply asleep, taking a handful of the sleeping pills from her grandmother's supply, and gone to the pizza parlour where Alfie was working. In the kitchen she had crushed the pills, which she had then mixed into a small bowl of sauce. They waited until the order came through from Mike. It seemed Mrs. Doris really did tell Layla everything, and had often complained about the mess in the security office when she went to take Mike a hot drink. After carefully observing him, Alfie and Layla had seen the patterns of what he ordered and from where. They'd then gotten Alfie a job at the pizza parlour, making sure he had a shift on the night of the 7th. Once the order came in, Layla had dressed herself in a uniform and taken receipt of the pizza herself to deliver to Mike. She had changed into all black clothing, including gloves and the overlarge shoes. She had staged the break-in using a ladder she'd found out the back. The blood, which when the DNA results came back, showed to be a person of O positive, but unknown DNA profile in the database. She had deliberately poured down the wall and then cleaned off to try and confuse the investigation. Layla worked for phlebotomist assistant at the hospital and had stolen a few vials of a patient's blood. It was lucky they had discovered the true criminals in time, otherwise this innocent stranger could have been blamed for the theft. Layla had seemed entirely unrepentant about attempting to frame a complete stranger. Then, around 3 a.m, she'd used her grandmother's key card to gain entry to the museum. First she checked on Mike to make sure he was asleep and that all the alarms were off. She tried to delete the digital records, wiping away evidence that she'd entered the building. Then it was as simple as picking the painting off the wall, carrying it back out to the car. Layla had to drive the rest of the night to drop the painting off at the cabin. She then rang George to let him know that it was a success, and then drove back to Daphne's bungalow before she woke up. Finally, she made sure her key card was back in the key dish. Daphne hadn't known a thing about the heist, or that Layla had even left the house. It wasn't until she heard the morning news on the radio that she'd even learnt of the theft. Due to the testimony, Daphne was released without charge. All 3 of her criminally minded grandchildren stood trial for theft. It was thanks to the evidence collected by Mia and Max that they were found guilty of their charges. Leah was glad that Daphne had been found innocent. She felt so sorry for the fact that she had been betrayed and used by 3 of her beloved grandchildren, even though they claimed it was for her benefit, and that she had lost her granddaughter's companionship. Mia had wanted to go and visit her, especially now that she was no longer working at the museum, but the adults warned her to stay away. They felt that any more interaction with the family could be dangerous, especially as it was known that it was their evidence that had helped convict the greedy, selfish grandchildren. Max was more sceptical. He still believed that the nice little old lady was actually the mastermind behind it all. He questioned how Layla had been able to carry the painting out to the car all by herself. What if she had known all along and been the one to plan it? Also, why did Doris and her 3 grandchildren have airplane tickets booked for Mexico? Surely she would have had to give her passport details to book in the tickets. His dad said he guessed they would never know for certain. What do you think?